Okay, good morning, everybody. As you know, as Dr. Maraktan said, we will start a little bit later today. I welcome all of you, although we're missing some people because they thought it was at 9 o'clock. I welcome all of you on behalf of the Athira Journal, which is the organizer of this seminar. Of course, this is for the general audience, which we don't have yet. So, Athira Journal is sponsored by Hassan bin Muhammad for the studies of ancient Arabia. Our guest today is, our keynote speaker today is Juan Antonio Belmonte Avilés. He is an astrophysicist by training and publisher and did a lot of work in astrophysics. And he is also works in archaeoastronomy. And he will show us today an example of that, how to get information about ancient nations using techniques which are not really available to the, if you want to say, like the regular archaeologist. So basically, he uses heaven objects to learn about ancient civilizations, their culture, and what they were doing in their history. Dr. Juan is the author of more than 400 papers, both in physics, pure physics, and also archaeoastronomy, if I say that. And he's also the author of like about 20 books in various subjects. So I will welcome Dr. Monte here. And so please, you can start.
Okay. Thank you, Ishan, and thank you to the organizers for counting on me. It is a pleasure to be here with such a huge group of outstanding scholars. I am a bit scared, actually, to talk to you because you are a specialist in epigraphy. As Hisham mentioned, I am an astronomer by training, although for the last 30 years I have been working in cultural astronomy, which is now my main research topic. To do that, we have a project which is called Orientatio ad Sidera in Latin, so orientation to the stars, which has been running for the last 20 years. We have worked in many countries around the world, but our most important area is the Middle East, especially Egypt is my main field, but also in the Arabian Peninsula. This is the topic I will touch today. I have been collaborating with archaeologists from Italy, archaeologists from Spain, and also from Saudi Arabia in the last years, and this has given me let's say, a good training to deal with all these aspects. So this is the skin of my presentation today. First, I will do a short introduction, then I will briefly discuss Nabatean deities because most of you should know that. Then the historic sources, the ethnographic sources, the Nabataean written sources, and then I will analyze the pilgrim routes and the hierophanies that we have been studied in the last few years. I will end with the Nabataean cultic calendar, which is the object of this presentation, and the calendar of Khirbet and Tannur. Well, most of you know Arabia. I don't need to explain anything about it, about the traveler's route in which Petra had a very special place. The Nabateans for a kingdom that lasted for 2 centuries in very good shape, dominating all northwest Arabia, the Sinai Peninsula, and part of what is today Jordan. And they had a dynasty, a very well-established dynasty. The first test date from the kingdom of Obodas I, and most of the inscriptions are dated to Aretas IV and Meliko II. The kingdom ended, but not the Nabatean cultural aspect, because of the annexation. Actually, the coins mention Adquisita, so Nabatea was never conquered. It was directly annexed by Emperor Trajan in the year 106 AD. Okay, so we will start our discussion on the different places. The main objective of this presentation will be Petra, Reken in Nabatea, a marvelous city in the middle of the mountains of Syria, with a splendid access, monumental access, as you may know, the Sikh, where there are a lot of relevant monuments and a lot of relevant aspects for the Nabatean cultures. And they have mostly, they have a couple of main deities. Later they were represented in the standard way of a deity, but originally most of the representation were in betyls. In betyls, in which we have representation of Dushara, the main deity of the Nabatean pantheon, also of Al-Qutba. Sometimes they are confused, but not always. And probably Dushara has a certain celestial aspect because he's mentioned in Hegra as the one who separates night from day. This is a clear astronomical mention. And then the feminine aspect of the deity were the goddess Al-Utha, so the most powerful one, and the goddess Al-Lat, which were variously identified with various deities of the Middle East and the East in general. And sometimes they are even confused between each other. So that Healy wrote a few years ago that it seems that the Nabataean deity basically has two main deities, a female one and a male one. Although there are, of course, representation of many other deities. For example, these very strange betyls with three different betyls all together, that we have made the interpretation that this is basically the representation, well, not us, I mean, a lot of people has interpreted them as a representation of the goddess Manawat, the goddess of fate, which could be related to the moon. So then to Tike, and possibly the most famous representation we have of her is the one in Khirbet Tannur. Okay? The nectaris sources that we have analyzed, Strabo, they worship the sun. This is pretty obvious from the text. Then Lucianus, that they held great festival. One of it was the opening of the spring. Then Procopius, it was mentioned by his son yesterday, that the season of the solstice was also relevant for them. Then we had the famous text by Nonosus, cited by Pothius, in which we had a very important astronomical information, because they argue that they gather twice each year. One of that moments was when the sun passes through the sign of Aries. This is clearly the equinoxial, the spring equinox, but also they celebrate for 2 months after the summer solstice. So we have two key moments in the festivals in the area. We also learned that the new moon was the beginning of their months. To judge by these different aspects, Healy suggested that there was a connection between annual spring festivals, aspect of pilgrimage, and also, I would add, solstitial aspect related to that. Some of the most important references come from the 4th century, so it's still when the province of Arabia was active. They come from Jerome, but the most important is from Epiphanius of Salamis, who was a native. He was born in Beit Ibrin, and he argued that there was a very great festival for the greatest goddess of the pantheon, in which a child was born. This born was the god Tushara, and this happened the very night of the Epiphany, so at the beginning of January of the Gregorian calendar. So this suggests that there were also celebrations related probably to the first moons or something like that after the winter solstice. Also, Epiphanius mentioned one very nice, there is one very important notice about a special month that was called Agat al-Bayth, with a certain parallelism with Dual Hijjah, in which they had a pilgrimage which corresponds to the month of Tisri. Tisri is the first month after the autumn equinox in this case. So we have a lot of information related to the solstices and the equinoxes, relevant astronomical key points of the yearly cycle in the sources that can be even traced to today. Important studies were made at the beginning of the 20th century in the area of Petra, suggesting that Jebel Harun was a very important reference with the Bedouins, so that, for example, they even bury Muslim deaths facing Mount Harun instead of the direction of the Qibla, which is a very peculiar fact, actually. And has been argued that they had festivals at the beginning of October and in the spring, and the most important references came from the anthropologist Tawfiq Kanan. Yes, if I can approach it. Tawfiq Kanan, who argued that twice in the year they gather to to offer their prayers and war to God, and this they did going to the top of Jebel Harun, and they did it twice. One in February. I would probably argue that this is related to the month after the winter solstice, and the second during the grape season. This was called the Darb and Nabi Harun. This pilgrimage was very important. They went out from Algi to the Wadi Musa. They crossed Asik, they crossed the ruins of Petra, and then they go to the top of the mountain in that epoch. They even sang a very strange poem in which Harun was associated with a sort of a star, or even with as the father of planets. So there are a way of astronomical connections in all the ethnographic aspects that we can find in Petra. So there are a lot of connections between the city, the deities, and astronomical dates. So we thought it was important to analyze also the written sources to see what they mention. The most important written sources are not found in Petra. They are found farther south, in the city of Hegra, in today Saudi Arabia, where close to the marvelous oasis of Al-Ula, one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen. To the north of the oasis, you have the city of Hegra, the southern capital of the Nabateans, where the solar clock that is the emblem of our conference was located. And the inscriptions are written in Nabataean, well, actually in Aramaic Nabataean, and several of them are dated, and the month is mentioned, and the year of the reign of the king is also mentioned. So 7 months are known from these inscriptions, and from that we can identify what kind of calendar the Nabateans had. We know that the Babylonian calendar started in the 4th month after the vernal equinox. This was the month of Nisan. And the Nabateans possibly used this calendar, but we are not sure if they started in Nisan or 6 months later in Tisri. We will see that possibly the question is that there were 2 aspects of a new year, that you cannot mention exactly a clear beginning of the year. You have the same in the case of the Hebrew, because in this case we know that they move the beginning of the year from Nisan to Tisri in the 4th century AD, so close to the moment, to a moment that we are discussing also today. So in the descriptions of Hegra, the months that are most cited are Nisan, Iyar, Bab, and Thebet, so related possibly to the spring equinox, to the summer solstice, and to the winter solstice. Tisri is not mentioned in any inscription in Nabatean as far as I know. But in any case, we know, thank you to the ethnographic sources and to the ethnohistoric sources, that it was also a relevant month for them. So with this information in mind, we may discuss this possibility of a double new year, and we'll see that our research confirms this fact. So we came with our archaeoastronomical fieldwork in the region. We have worked in most of the Nabataean sites in what is today Jordan. Of course, Petra was our main objective. We visited and measured most of the largest buildings in the city, from high places to important monuments. We even reached quite difficult sites on top of the hills, most of the high places in different mountains. And this is the polar diagram of orientation that we got, which has a typical form of the Malta cross. The Malta cross is a typical form for astronomical orientations because it is related to a preferred north-south orientation and an orientation east-west. And this is basically what we have found. Here you have another way of representing the data. It's what we call the declination histogram. I will not go into the astronomical details. Just have a look at this important peak in the middle, which is associated to the equinox. So we predicted that in several places in Petra, there should have been connection to the equinoxes. And I will show you some of them. For example, in Almadras, who was a very important neighborhood of Petra, it was sacred. There are a lot of sacred places on site. There are high places. There are places to put beetles everywhere. And from the most important sacred area, you have a clear connection to Jebel Harun. We have been there at the equinox, and this photograph was taken exactly at the equinox. So you have sunset exactly on the top of Jebel Harun. Actually, the sun sets behind the Harun Shirin. So this is, for us, a very clear connection. But this is not the only one. I mean, we have another one, for example, in the famous Jebel Matbah. We have on the one side the famous obelisks, the Sif Atuf. They are also equinoxially oriented, as we could test it on site on 2 occasions. We have been there on 2 occasions. In this case, the orientation works better to sunrise than to sunset. And the obelisks are not oriented to Jebel Harun. However, the altar on top of Jebel Matbah is orientated to Jebel Harun. So there's a connection of the Nabataean monuments also to the top of Jebel Harun. And when this happens, curiously, in October, so in the month of Tisri. So there are also connections between the monuments in Petra and possibly the month of Tisri, although we couldn't find any evidence in the written sources of the Nabateans about this month. Another very important place is, of course, the Urn tomb. The Urn tomb is thought to be the tomb of one of the Nabataean kings. We don't know which one, but it has a clear astronomical connection. The principal axis is orientated to sunset at the equinoxes of al-Biyara. We have been there, we have tested, it works perfectly. Actually, you can test it with high precision. But even more, there are connections to the winter solstice sunset in one of the corners of the monument and to the summer solstice sunset on the other corner. Actually, if you see the geometry of the tomb, it is built in such a way that the sunset is always visible from some place of the interior of the tomb. So it is perfectly orientated in this way. And it is very funny because from the Christian aspect, you have orientation to Christmas, Easter, and St. John. And this could be a justification of why the Urn tomb was converted into the Cathedral of Petra by Bishop Jason exactly on June 24 of 447. So this relationship of the astronomical and Christian calendar to the pattern of the tomb could justify this assimilation as the cathedral. There are another 2 important peaks in the declination histogram. These are related to the solstices, so we also decided to investigate this. And the most, and I will show you the better example, the best example that we have. We think that it is related to a pilgrimage route from the center of the city to the top of the hills. It would have started in the Winged Lion Temple. The Winged Lion Temple was possibly the temple of Alusa, the main temple of Alusa in Petra. It has a curious orientation because it is orientated to Suhail, so to the most important star for the Arabs of the epoch. And actually, it was built in such a way that you had the possibility of circumambulation around the main sanctuary of the temple. So you have a similarity to Kaaba. You have an orientation to Canopus, as Kaaba had, and also you have this custom that Muslims still follow today. So there are traditions that we can follow since very ancient times. This was possibly the origin of the way up to the mountains. There should have been a first stop in a place called the Lion's Triclinium. In the Lion's Triclinium is called in this way because there are representation of lions in the outside. And in our second campaign in Petra, we predicted that sunrise at the winter solstice must be visible for the interior of the sanctuary. And the rest of the year, the sunrise will never illuminate the monument. So we went there with a team of the Irish television, and we were able to observe this marvelous phenomenology. So the sun at sunrise in the winter solstice crosses by the small window. Imagine that the rest is erosion, so only the circular oculus will be present, and the sun crosses that point, and then it illuminates the niche where the statue of the deity should have been located. So this is at sunrise. If you proceed to the top of the mountain, then you reach the most important place in Petra, up there, the monastery. We have been there 4 occasions. We predicted in 1996 that it would have been orientated to winter solstice sunset, and we went back to Petra on 2 occasions to check it. And the situation is really marvelous. I mean, in the altar, there are strong evidence that there was a betyl of a Nabataean deity that possibly cut when it was converted into a monastery by the Christian occupiers of the city. And this is what we found in one of our campaigns. So that when the sun sets, it perfectly illuminates the place of the altar. Actually, I have discussed this with Professor McKinsey, who died just a few years ago. And we argued that the whole interior structure of Adair was sculpted within the mountain in such a way that this phenomenology could be produced, so that the gate would fit exactly the size of the altar at the moment of sunset in the winter solstice. Furthermore, if you locate at the place of the altar, what you would see in front of you is this very nice rock, which looks like the shape of the head of a lion. The lion is the animal related to Alusa, and on occasions also to Allah. And you have a very impressive phenomena because you have a double sunset. So the sun sets first on the top there, and then it rises again, and then it sets for a second time. This is very peculiar because this is a perfect marker for the solstice. The solstice normally happens for a week or so that the sun moves very slowly. But with such a precision marker, you can have the solstice with a precision of 2 or 3 days. Actually, what they did is that they sculpted the mountain to have this phenomenology, because the originality was not there. And we associate this relationship with the citation of Epiphanius of the day of the Epiphany, so close to the winter solstice, related to the birth of Dushara. So we imagine that this was the place when this festival, where this festival was celebrated. To me, this is something, probably the most impressive aspect that we have discovered so far in Nabatea. The relationship of a pilgrimage road from the center of the city to Adair, possibly connected to the birth of Dushara from Alusa or from his cum consort Alusa. Every theory that you propose every scientific theory needs a falsification. So you need to test it somewhere else. So since at least 15 years ago, we wanted to go to Saudi Arabia. We wanted to test our theory in Hegra. So finally, 2 years ago, we managed to organize a project. It's the archaeoastronomy mission in Hegra and Dadan, well, actually in Alula. under the umbrella of the Royal Commission of Alula. And we went there, we measured the orientation of most of the important places in the region, and the most important for us, because we would have a strong statistical significance, were the tombs. So we concentrated in the tombs, we analyzed the inscriptions, each of them, the relationship with the calendar, also the iconography. We strongly believe that the iconography of Nabateans tombs is related to astronomy, because the number 12 is repeated everywhere in the symbology of the site. So we measured a total of 116 tombs, most of the necropolis. I mean, only the ones that we have to climb with cords, these were the only ones that we decided, and most of them are not of Nabataean time. Probably they are even earlier, from the Dadanite period. We worked in all the different necropolis, and last year we published a paper on that. The first thing we tested was the hypothesis 0, in which Leila Nehme, who has been excavated marvelously for 2 decades in Hegra, she has done an excellent job, but she argued that apparently the tombs were facing the center of the city. Actually, they don't. They don't. The center of the city is around this structure IGN 132, and you can easily see that the tombs are facing in some other direction. And this direction is predominantly astronomical. Actually, if you only consider the tomb with dates, or the tombs with the representation of an eagle, which are normally associated to Dushara, the orientation are clearly concentrated in the solar arc, between sunrise and sunset along the year. With this in mind, we also produce another way of representing the polar diagram, is this one, in which you can see the concentrations, where the concentrations are located. And you have a concentration at the winter solstice, so in some way we confirm our results in Petra. And we have here 2 models, in yellow and red, which are related to the crescents of Nisan. So in some way, the tombs of Hegra, the month which is most cited in description is Nisan, and this is moonset. Sorry, no, I mentioned sun. It's to the moon. It's to the moon of Nisan, the orientation. The models represent the moon of Nisan. So in some way we can confirm that Nisan actually was important, not only because of the descriptions, but also because of the orientation of the tombs. That is confirming what we have previously imagined. So in that sense, there is also a strong concentration due south, which we have speculated it might be connected to Canopus as a relevant star for the Nabataeans. So with this, we can produce a sort of Nabataean cultic calendar, in which we will have several relevant moments, that the full moon of Nisan after the spring equinox, the first crescent after the spring equinox, the first crescent after the summer solstice, the first crescent after the autumn equinox, the one in Tisri. This is not in the orientation of the tombs, but we have other evidences about it, especially related to this month of Agat al-Bayth, and of course the winter solstice, associated to the birth of Dushara. So these are the basic points, but we still have one point to discuss. One thing that puzzled us, well, we can confirm that the Nabataean kingdom retained a lunisolar calendar of Babylonian type of the Seleucid period. But we had one point that was relevant. As I mentioned before, in the year 106, Nabataea was acquisita by Emperor Trajan, and it was converted in a Roman province. If you look at the maps of the Roman Empire in all the books, they are wrong, because they normally settle the frontier of the Roman Empire close to Petra, but we know that the Romans were in Hegra for at least 200 years. there are strong evidences, archaeology has demonstrated that they were there for at least 2 centuries. So the frontiers should be moved farther south. And most important, they imposed a new calendar. And we imagine that this calendar is related to the Khirbet and Tannur zodiac. Originally, this had been the zodiac, this had been called a zodiac. Khirbet Tannur, the ancient name was Hurawa, may have been a center of pilgrimage, possibly even a national ring. It is close to Wadi al-Hassa, which split the south of Jordan, and it was connected to another sanctuary to the south called Khirbet Edari today, and in ancient times it was called Ain al-Leban. So there was a pilgrimage route between the two of them. We know that festival was celebrated on the top of Khirbet Tannur. Here you have the hill where the temple is located, with an excellent view of the wadi. Now there is a dam there. And this is a skin of the temple, as reproduced by the team of Judith McKinsey in his marvelous book about this place, because the original excavator, Nelson Glueck, never published the results, which is a pity, but this was the case. And of course, the most famous piece that was found in Khirbet Tannur is the zodiac. And I put zodiac between commas. I will show you later why. Okay? The top part were discovered by Glueck. The lower one was found in a house decades after, and nobody knows how it reached this house. So, but it perfectly fits with the upper one. Okay, so here you have the detail of this piece with TK in the middle, maybe also among goddess of the period. And here you have the zodiacal signs. If you see, it is not exactly a zodiac because, for example, Aries and Capricornus are not represented. There are human representations where these zodiacal signs would be expected, which is itself peculiar in some sense. So what is the best interpretation for this? Associated to the zodiac, there are a series of dots, okay? When the piece was excavated from the stone, 5 dots were left in different places as marking that this was something important. So when people imagine that this was a zodiac, they imagine that this could be the location of the planets. So it could be a horoscope in some way. Okay, so the best cultural astronomers of the epoch included my old friend Owen Gingerich from Harvard University, did the job, and he found that for 4 of the dots there were clear associations, and he predicted that the planet Saturn should be in Pisces. Another work was made by Stallman, and he, in this case, he also found a very good fitting for another date. Both dates were too early, actually, because we now know that the temple was built during the Roman era. And he predicted that Jupiter should be in Aquarius. The problem is that when the piece below was found, there were nothing at all of a dot in that position. So the astronomical hypothesis collapsed. Okay? So then, if it is not a horoscope, this is not a zodiac. What is it? We believe that it is connected with the calendar. Actually, when we analyze the orientation of the main temple, we discover that it is orientated to the new year in the era of Arabia, which is close to the equinox, not exactly at the equinox. It's 3 days before the astronomical equinox. Okay? And that then, when the Nabataean calendar was converted into a solar one of Egyptian type, similar to the one using both the Babylonian names and also the Greek names of the Seleucid Empire, then you will have some structure like this. So the zodiac signs should not be interpreted as zodiac themselves, but as months. And then in these months, if you reproduce the dots, they are exactly at the most important festivals of the Nabataean cultic calendar. So the zodiac of Khirbet Tannur is actually not a zodiac, but an almanac. It is a sort of almanac in which the people will know that in these months they should gather at the place because they should celebrate their most important festivals associated to Nisan, associated to Siwan, which is actually the summer solstice. Siwan, we don't know exactly which one is it, but Ab associated to the summer solstice, and of course Tebet associated to the birth of Dushara. This might explain why there is the image of a young boy at the side of Capricornus, because then it would be related to the birth of Dushara, the celebration of the birth of Dushara on site. So in some way, we can see that what we have is a sort of lunar festivities within a solar Julian framework. So pretty similar what today the Christian have. I mean, we have Easter, which is governed by the moon within a solar framework. So in some way, they did exactly the same in Nabatea. The question is that this, which is very similar to the Greek and Roman parapekma, this did not follow in time, because we know that the Islamic era brought a lunar calendar. So the calendars of the Nabataean, in some way of the Nabataean during the Roman era, was somehow forgotten. We don't know why, we don't know in which sense, but it was completely forgotten afterwards. And now to end my presentation, I had a sort of desert for our Jordan colleagues. I don't know if they are connected today, because one of the monuments that we also studied in Petra, this is, was of course Al-Hazna. Al-Hazna, we now know that it was related possibly with the goddess Isis, and in that way it was connected also to Al-Usa and even to Shakulat, the wife of Aretas IV. And when we measure it, we discovered that it is possibly orientated to the extreme northernmost rising of the full moon, with what is called the lunastice, the major northern lunastice. And by chance, in December this year, we will have this phenomenology. So if any of you might be in Petra at that night, you might see the rising of the full moon from the center, from the gate of Al-Hadna, rising exactly over a sikh, which should be a very, very nice phenomenon. There are another moon phenomena in the city, for example, at the Sikh al-Majin, but unfortunately, we cannot be there because probably we will be in Hegra doing fieldwork during that period, but this is something worth testing. And that's all. This is my presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.